All right, welcome. In this video lesson, we're going to keep it simple with our colors. We're just going to use black and white, but I'm going to show you a whole bunch of landscape techniques, and it's going to be a lot easier to practice when you're just using those two colors. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is some mountains in the background. Now, I want these mountains to be clearly mountains with snow on them, but I also want them to be a light enough color so that they look far away. We want the things in the distance to be a little bit lighter and the things that are in the foreground to be darker. Now, part of this is that we're going to cover up these mountains with kind of a white mist, but part of it is that we can actually use less paint on the mountains. So for example, to make the sky, I just dusted a little black here and there, just kind of randomly. And then I'm scooping up a little black with a dish scrubby, which is that green thing that you use to scrub your pots. I tear off a chunk, it's a great tool, dip it into some black, and draw my mountains in. Now, I'm not using a lot of paint, and I'm mostly applying the black paint to the top edge of the mountains, and then just kind of fading it out and dragging the paint around in a way that it just brushing against the paper. It's very dry, and that gives me just kind of a light gray color. And then I can go in there with some white and a torn piece of poster board and just draw in the snow. And I'm going to scoop up that white with my torn piece of poster board with the flat edge and apply it mostly to one side of the mountain where I want the light to be, but it can be a little bit on either side as well. And that white, as it comes down, there's more and more of it. And then we're just going to fade this out with some white. Fade it out with white so it looks far away. We can even dust a little bit over the mountains themselves so they recede into the distance. And let's make another layer of mountains. Now remember, we've got a little bit of black already underneath, so we actually don't even need to scoop up any black. We can just use the black that's already on there and reveal it by rubbing it with our dish scrubby and just creating those very light gray mountains, just very little bit of paint, and then adding a few details with the dark black. And this makes it look even closer to us because we're seeing more detail, more variation. So it's going to look closer, and then we can go in there with that white on that torn piece of poster board and just draw in some snow over the gray parts and over the dark parts, and that gives us some nice variety because we have these different areas covered with snow. Now I'm keeping it really abstract because all of these mountains that we're creating now are going to be in the background. This is the background, so we don't want a lot of detail. We want enough so that you can see that it's closer, but not so much that it's going to interfere with the things that are right in front of the view or the mountains that are closer. Now notice the shapes of these mountains are longer and more extended than the mountains behind them. That's another way of showing that they're closer to the viewer. So I'm covering them up with kind of an abstract layer of snow, and once I've done that, well, I can envelop them in our cloudy sky again with some white paint all along the bottom of it, and I'm not afraid to get a little bit on top of the mountain as well. All right, so let's start by adding another layer. Now we're a whole lot closer at this point, and we're going to create sort of some mountains and some waterfalls. A waterfall far in the distance here. So this time they're not going to be mountain peak shapes, they're going to be sort of rounded hill shapes. And I'm going to use a little bit more paint, a little bit darker, but again, not filling in all the details, leaving some areas gray. The less paint you use, actually, the better in some ways. As long as you get it the color you want, but using only a small amount of paint and leaving some areas blank, and that makes it interesting. It's an interesting look. And then you can cover that up. You can use the dish scrubby to apply a little white paint, and then to change the texture, I used what's called a paint pad. SHUR-LINE is the brand in the United States, a paint pad, and I cut in a little semicircle and added some texture. Now I sprayed some water on this because this is water-based paint. You would spray some clear coat or some transparent on it, and I kind of dragged the paint down from the top of those hills. And that is because in my imagination there's a lot of water falling here. These areas have been sort of worn by all the water that falls over them, and we're going to show you one waterfall that's falling right now in the middle. So with a piece of torn poster board, I use the vertical side and I dip it in some white paint, and right in the middle of those two mountains, maybe there's some water falling down. So I just draw that in with my torn piece of poster board, and then I can fill in some foam, some vapor at the bottom with just some white, and then I can brush my fingers across to create the water, as long as I've got a little bit of black paint and white paint over it at the base. So there we have some hills and a waterfall. Now let's create the part of the painting that's right in the foreground. So this part is going to be nice and dark. This is going to be even darker because it's right in the foreground. So we want to show that by using just black, heavy black, and then filling in the rest with some black spray paint so that it's the darkest black. And then we can add in a little bit of texture just with some sliding newspaper techniques, taking our newspaper and drawing inside with our fingers to draw the edges of those mountains to define them some mountain peaks. If you want to learn more about sliding newspaper techniques and how to use the newspaper to do that, there's a video called Sliding Newspaper Techniques in the resources section. Please make sure that you've watched that so you understand how to hold the newspaper and all the tricks of that technique. Okay, so let's add some pine trees on top of this little area that we've created. Another torn piece of poster board technique. Just tear off a chunk from, it's the same paper that we're working on, and tap upwards to create the trunks of the pine trees, and then turn it horizontally, and with that black paint just tap in the leaves, starting small. There's just a few leaves at the tops, and then they get bigger and bigger the farther down towards the base of the pine tree that you get. Feel free to use your dish scrubby or crumpled up newspaper or whatever you need to fill in the bottoms of those pine trees. Sometimes the bottoms of the pine trees can be a little bushy. Maybe some foliage down there or something. Now I'm making these pine trees rather tall and narrow because, well, they're kind of far away, all on top of the mountain peak, and we can see them, but these tall, narrow pine trees are really graceful. Remind me a lot of Colorado, where they have, the pines are just kind of more tall. They're not as squat. All right, so once we've tapped in our pine trees, it's time to start adding a little bit of snow all over everything, a little bit of definition. So we're going to do that with white paint. So I'm going to use my black paint and my white paint to make all the bushes and the trees. And the first layer is the black paint, and generally I'm going to apply that with a dish scrubby, and then I'm going to use a paint pad cut into a semicircle to apply some of that white paint. But let's add our tree in first. So again, a nice dark brave line right in the foreground of the painting. We'll start our tree making a trunk, and we'll make of course it's going to be a winter tree. This place looks very chilly. So draw in the trunk. If you want a wide trunk, that's fine. If you want a couple of trunks up, that's fine. But generally the trees that are growing in wintry areas are kind of straight up and down, strong trees. And we'll add some branches. The branches can be quite long compared to the trunk, thin and long, surprisingly so, and they can reach out quite far. And there's a beautiful stained glass-like effect that you get when you've got these dark branches in front of a much brighter background. And that's the advantage of keeping the background light enough. And you can see that even though we used black, the fact that we kept it gray and didn't use a lot helps a lot, because now we've got this nice dark tree. And as we're branching out, creating all these branches, we get this beautiful framing of the white color in the background. Now you might want to thin your paint when you make the branches so that it flows better. You might want to use a thinner brush, like a small round brush or a liner brush. It's okay to have long, thin branches, and it's okay also to have small, spiky branches. A lot of branches break off when it's cold, or sometimes there's a tiny little bit of new growth and it just hasn't caught on yet. You can even have a tree trying to grow out of another tree, like a branch that's growing up but hasn't thickened up yet. So one thing you can do is you can Google tree silhouettes or trees in winter, and you can take a look at the pictures, print them out, and just practice with black paint, black acrylic water-based paint, and a notebook in front of I like to practice while I watch movies in a little sketchbook or something and really get the hang of different kinds of tree shapes that you might see in winter. And once you've got the shape that you like, well, we're gonna do two kinds of shading on it. Now, because we've only got black and white, we might need different varieties of black and white color. So you can get one particular shade of white. It looks very different if you carve into the tree with your palette knife. Then if you tap that white on, you get different kinds of shading, different kinds of a look. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in there with my palette knife, make sure the tree's wet enough, and carve into it anywhere I want there to be some highlights. Remove some paint with my palette knife. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to tap on some white paint with a torn piece of poster board, but I'm going to start adding the highlights to this other section first. So I've got a torn piece of poster board and some white paint, and I'm adding a few highlights to our pine trees, just the same way that I created the leaves in the first place, holding that torn piece of poster board vertically and tapping on a little bit of snow. Generally, the branches will have a little bit of snow resting on them, so you don't want to cover up the whole thing. You just want little bits of white here and there. And then with our paint pad, just look how easy this is, just to tap in little areas of bushes. It looks so beautiful because of the texture that the paint pad has. Again, it's SHUR-LINE is the brand you can find in the United States. Cut it into a little semicircle, and then you can make these beautiful bushes just so easily. You want to concentrate most of the paint along the top part of the paint pad. That's what gets you those snowy lines at the top. And then with my torn piece of poster board and some white paint, I'm going to tap up the sides of the tree, creating the bark texture, but already using that texture that we've already created there by using our palette knife. And when you have both of those textures, you get a nice complex look. So you can see that with just two colors, there's a lot that you can do and a lot that you can learn. You can go far. And these are paintings that audiences love and can be done very, very quickly. So I hope that you'll practice these two color paintings. I'm enjoying doing them for you, and I hope that they really work for you and that you enjoy using some of the tools that I've shown you in here. So you can see as we're tapping up the trunk, really defining the shape of that tree with that torn piece of poster board. Remember that the tree's going to have some roots at the bottom branching out, so you want to create those too by using the black and tapping in and the palette knife and defining them. Don't forget the roots. And at the end, when you finished all that area, remember everything's enveloped in this beautiful mist, so let's add some white and maybe brush our hand back and forth to show that the mist is rising from the lake and the trees there and the waterfalls falling into it. And now all we need is a little moon, so we can do that with our CD, just a little bit of white paint in there. We've got a moon and we've got a great landscape. So I hope you've enjoyed this and that you give two color paintings a try. Black and white's a great way to learn, and I'm here if you have any questions. Ciao.